New list, new reaction. ESPN is releasing their top 100 players in the NBA, and Paul George and Kawhi Leonard are in the top 15. But are they in the top 10? No. ESPN says the Clippers don't have any top 10 players. Are they tripping? Are they right? We're going to talk about it all on today's Locked On Clippers.
You are Locked On Clippers, your daily Los Angeles Clippers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, sir. You are locking in with the Clips. Thank you for making Locked On Clippers the first listen of your day, your team every day. I am your host, Darian Vaziri, 18 years a Clipper fan. Also have my own YouTube channel called Dime Dropper. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Dime Dropper Pod for LA sports and NBA history. LA sports, that includes the LA Clippers, which are probably your favorite team if you're listening to this podcast. And today we are going to be reacting to I'm going to be reacting to yet another list that's been released. This time it's ESPN. They always do this every single season, release their top 50 or top 100 players list. I'm not sure if it's 50 or 100, but the point is, in the top 50, which they've released, there are only two Clippers in there. And they're obviously Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. Now, today, or it would be yesterday if you're listening to this, they released the ranking of where they feel Kawhi Leonard and Paul George rank in the NBA among players. So we're going to be talking about that. Let's start out with Paul George. So PG is ranked 15th by ESPN. Now, I don't think that ranking is too bad. I believe Paul George, as of right now, going into this season, is in the 10 to 15 range. I'd say 11 to 15. I wouldn't put him in my top 10 as of now. But Paul George can very easily play like a top 10 player when he's at his best. And I think that there's a chance he does play at that level this season, and you'd hope that he plays at that level this season. But I think as of right now, if we're counting Kawhi, who I consider better than Paul George, and I think most people would, Paul George falls into that 11 to 15 range for me. I would have him around 12 or 13, but ESPN has him ranked 15th. So let's see who they have over him. Very similar to the 2K ranking. Number 11 is James Harden. Number 12 is Kawhi Leonard. Number 13 is Karl Anthony Towns. Number 14 is Damian Lillard. And number 15 is Paul George. So I know what you're probably thinking. Kawhi Leonard is ranked 12th behind James Harden, not top 10. And listen, we're going to get into Kawhi very shortly, but we're going to talk about Paul George first. And so Paul George, number 12, number 15, it's not bad, but let's talk about Damian Lillard, right? Damian Lillard is ranked 14th. Damian Lillard, who missed the majority of last season, although Paul George also missed the majority of last season, but Damian Lillard missed it with an abdomen injury, and in the beginning of the season, he did not even look good, Damian Lillard. People were talking about how the rule changes may have affected him, and that's why his percentages were so off. And then it was later revealed that he was really injured, and it may have been a little bit of both. Maybe partially the rule changes that were being enforced harder in the beginning of the season. They were being enforced harder in the beginning, and you saw a lot of guards like Dame, like James Harden, who have become experts in drawing fouls over the years, struggle a bit in the beginning of the season. But of course, Dame was also battling an injury. So just to be sure, or just to be exact, Damian Lillard played 29 games last season. That's only 2 less than Paul George. He averaged 24 points a game, 7 assists a game, and 4 rebounds. So the stats are not that different than Paul George, who averaged 24 points as well. But the main difference for me is, one, the winning, of course. The Clippers were 18 and 13 with Paul George played last season. But also the defense, which Damian Lillard has never had over Paul George and will never have over Paul George. The size. PG is a 6'8", 6'9", wing player who can not only do a decent job on your best player, but overall just getting over screens. He's a much bigger threat to deter your guards, your elite players, and he's amazing in the passing lanes. Last season, he actually averaged tied for his career high in steals, 2.2 a game. He was great in the passing lanes, active hands when he played, and of course, he has the ability to switch onto multiple positions, which Damian Lillard absolutely does not have. Damian Lillard is the type of player who teams target in the pick and roll. Whoever Dame's guarding, come set a screen for my best player. Paul George does not get targeted in that fashion. And last season, Paul George was just better than Damian Lillard in the games that they played. The team was better. He was individually better. Last season, Paul George averaged 24 points, 7 rebounds, and 6 assists. You heard that correctly. 6 assists for Paul George, which was a career high. So he's getting better. Ever since Ty Lue came to the Clippers, he's really empowered Paul George and given him the ball more to make him more like a point forward, because the Clippers do not have a true point guard. Now there's John Wall, but as I said, I consider John Wall an attack first point guard. He's the best passer, assist man on the roster right now, but he created his advantages in Washington by being such a great downhill threat where he attracted attention in the pick and roll or just driving and would dump it off to guys like Gortat or shooters like Otto Porter or Bradley Beal. So he's leveraging his scoring ability, his scoring threat, or as they call it now, gravity, to create opportunities for others. And it's the same with Paul George and Kawhi. And in that high pick and roll, Paul George has really gotten better at making those reads, finding open shooters in the corners, guys like Nico Batum, Marcus Morris, finding Zubats on lobs. He's really improved a lot. So Damian Lillard over Paul George going into the 2022-23 season is a stretch in my opinion. And again, if we're talking about 2019, when Damian Lillard hit a sidestep 40-footer over Paul George to knock him out of the playoffs, yes, I can understand and agree that Damian Lillard should be ranked higher than Paul George that season. But we have not, ever since Ty Lue has taken over for the Clippers, Paul George has been better than Damian Lillard. In 2021, you can make an argument that in the regular season, Damian Lillard may have been a tad better than Paul George, but in the playoffs, there's no comparison. Paul George had maybe the best playoff run of his career, and he's had a couple really good ones, especially with Indiana. But obviously leading the Clippers to the conference finals and playing fantastic, looking like the best player in the majority of games against the Phoenix Suns, I'd say, in that Western Conference Finals. And then Damian Lillard obviously had that. He played great in the series against Denver on the offensive side of the ball, especially Game 5. If you remember that Game 5, Blazers played Denver. He was unbelievable with his shot making, but they still lost the game. And a lot of it is because the Blazers just couldn't guard. And a huge problem with the Blazers over those years was CJ McCollum and Damian Lillard are your best players, and they're 6'4" and under, and they don't really play much defense. And even when they do put a little more effort on defense, some guys just don't have the tools to be good defenders. He's smaller, he's skinnier. He doesn't have the longest arms or anything like that. He's not great laterally. He just doesn't have. Defense is a skill in its own way. I think when people talk about most skilled players, they only talk about offense, but defense is absolutely a skill, and a skill that Paul George has and has always had. So Damian Lillard being over him going into this season, I think is a little bit, I think it's kind of ridiculous. And then Karl Anthony Towns being over him, I talked about this in the 2K episode, but I am a firm believer that Karl Anthony Towns has never been better than Paul George in his entire life, and I stand by that really, really strongly. Because Karl Anthony Towns, look, he had the best season of his career last year. He returned to the All-Star game after a 2-year absence, 24.6 points a game, so right around the same scoring as Paul George, just a tad higher, decimal points higher. 10 rebounds a game and 3.5 assists, or 3.6 assists. But his shooting splits are really what stick out. 53% from the field and 41% from three. Mind you, this guy's 6'11", 7 feet tall. So that's really what gives him the edge. He played 74 games as well, so he definitely had a better season than Paul George. But when they both played, or when Paul George was playing, it really isn't much of a debate in my opinion, at all. Because, again, we go to that defensive side of the ball. Karl Anthony Towns, he used to have a reputation for being a bad defender. I don't see it that way anymore. I think he's average. He's not great moving his feet in the pick and roll. He's not great deterring shots at the rim. He only averages 1 block a game. And for a guy who's that tall and very strong, when you look at him, I think he should average more. But, blocking is not just size and long arms. It's a lot of timing. It's a lot of anticipation. And it's a lot of just reading what the player you're guarding is going to do and angles and all that kind of stuff. And again, when we talk about the skill of defense, I just don't think Karl-Anthony Towns is elite in that category. Paul George is very good, though. And Paul George, not only that, is a proven leader of his team. You can make an argument that Karl-Anthony Towns kind of led this team. This was his second playoff appearance, and everybody knows that in 2018, when the Timberwolves last made the playoffs, it was Jimmy Butler who was the true leader of the team. But we saw in the play-in game that the Clippers lost to the Timberwolves that it wasn't Karl-Anthony Towns that was the big threat that was pushing them forward. It was Anthony Edwards. And in my opinion, after this season, and this is just a prediction, I think Anthony Edwards will be known and seen as the best player on the Timberwolves because he has that it factor that you can't put into a statistic. He has that confidence where you watch press conferences from last season and Anthony Edwards is talking about Cat needs to stop being so timid. He needs to be more aggressive. They can't guard you. I be telling him they can't guard you, bro. And this is a guy that's several years younger than the person you're listening to right now. Several years. He's going into his third season, and he's telling Karl-Anthony Towns, who's going into his eighth season, you got to be more aggressive, bro. So what does that tell me? That tells me that Anthony Edwards, and then when you see the body language, you see the games, he looks like more of that quote-unquote alpha personality that is a franchise leader. And Karl-Anthony Towns, and you know what? You might be saying, Paul George may not be. You can say that all you want. But Paul George, at the age of Karl-Anthony Towns, was leading the Indiana Pacers deep into the playoffs consecutively, and then he broke his leg and bounced back and didn't even have a very good supporting cast at all, and that's putting it nicely, and still made it to the playoffs twice with no other All-Star on his roster. So Paul George, again, when he played, he was better than Karl-Anthony Towns in my eyes. He's better on both ends of the floor. He's more experienced. And again, you might want to say Karl-Anthony Towns is better on offense. Here's my biggest issue with Cat. When teams, and you saw it with the Clippers playing them in the play-in, when teams go small and try to play him with wings, he no longer takes advantage of his size and goes to the post like we saw at Kentucky. He doesn't take advantage of size, so he ends up just posting up at the three-point line or getting the ball at the three-point line against a wing player like a Nico Batum or a Robert Covington or even like a Kyle Anderson, these various guys in the Memphis series who guarded him and really limited him. When you talk about Karl-Anthony Towns and you want to talk about him at his best, it's about having an inside-outside threat. But when that just becomes an outside threat, you are removing your advantage as a 7-footer outside of just being able to shoot over somebody. And it was very clear that Karl-Anthony Towns did not perform up to standard in that series against the Grizzlies because the way that the Timberwolves defended Ja Morant, that series was there for the taking. Karl-Anthony Towns, who I just said averaged 24.6 points per game in the regular season, averaged 22 points per game in the playoffs, and his efficiency dropped from the field. His three-point percentage was still really good, but 49% from the field, and he only shot 13 shots a game. Whereas in the regular season, he shot 16. So that, I always say the true sign of a superstar is raising their game in the playoffs. And that is not what Karl-Anthony Towns has done in 2 playoff appearances that he has had. And you might be thinking, well, Paul George has definitely had his fair share of moments. Absolutely. But I can also point to moments, many of them, where Paul George has raised his game in the playoffs. Look no further than the last time he actually played in a series, 2021. Karl-Anthony Towns is not more experienced than Paul George. I think you would be shocked to go around and ask people who would you rather have going into this season and them to say Karl-Anthony Towns. The only argument I can think of is health. That's the only thing I can think of. So, and then James Harden, I mean, he does not look the same. He does not look the same, point blank. He's lost a step. He has gone through a lot of injuries the last couple of years. And he looks like he's also gained a bit of weight, too, because of those injuries. He doesn't look like he has that same burst. He doesn't get by guys with the same quick first step that he used to in Houston. And despite the fact that his numbers still look pretty good, I want to talk about a guy who took a nosedive in the playoffs, James Harden. And then let's not even get into the defensive side of the ball with him. So I'm taking Paul George over all these guys going into the season. And I don't even think that's total bias. I really think he's just better to me. He really is. But another guy who's better than all the guys I just named is Kawhi Leonard. And I'm going to be talking about where he ranks coming up. I know many of you Clipper fans are also LA Charger fans, and the Chargers are -7 this weekend against the Jacksonville Jaguars at SoFi Stadium, -105. Make sure you place your bets on BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all your pro and college football betting needs and sports info this season and every season. Find all of the latest football league developments, game matchups, news, and podcasts, including this weekend's games. Justin Herbert, let's see how he does this weekend against Jacksonville. BetOnline is also your continued source for all your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. It's the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite sports, events, and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Okay, Kawhi Leonard time, ladies and gentlemen. He was ranked 11th, which is, when Kawhi Leonard is healthy, that's absolutely egregious. But again, missing a year of basketball can have people worrying, can have people thinking, is he going to be the same? Is he going to be the Kawhi Leonard that we last saw? Because the Kawhi Leonard that we last saw, and this is the reason why I really have a problem with this ranking, is even if he's 80% of that version, he's better than James Harden was this playoffs in this season. Because I don't even do I have to defend myself? The only player above him in this list that they've released so far, you can guess the top 10 names. But Kawhi Leonard came out 12th in the list. James Harden is 11th. And again, James Harden, he doesn't move without the ball. He's still a very good player. Don't get me wrong. He still has the ability to score with some of the best of them. He's a great passer. I think his passing is really what sticks out at this stage of his career, averaging 10 assists for Philadelphia when he came, and really being the point guard. But Kawhi Leonard's ability on both ends of the floor, his experience, what we've seen him do at the highest level. And the last time he played, guys, which was only a little over a year ago, not 3 years ago, not 5 years ago like people seem to act, it was only a year ago. And this guy was arguably the best player in the world. In the world. James Harden, in 2018, you can maybe make an argument he's in that conversation, but besides that year, he has not been in that conversation. And even then, I'd still take Steph Curry, KD, and LeBron over him. I'd still take those three over him, even though you can argue that, especially with James Harden having taken the Warriors to 7 games. But LeBron James was pretty much viewed as the consensus best player in 2018. Some people like to say Kevin Durant. But in 2021, it was really a conversation. Giannis was in the mix. Kawhi was in the mix. Before LeBron got the ankle injury, he was kind of in the mix in the beginning of the season, coming off that title. But Kawhi Leonard was firmly in this discussion in the playoffs when he was playing. And in the regular season, the last one he played, he averaged 25 points, 6.5 boards, and 5 assists on 51% shooting and 40% from 3. That's to go along with very good defense as well. And in the playoffs, he was insane. 30.4 points per game, 8 rebounds, and 4.4 assists on 57% shooting and 39 from deep. That's just 57% shooting in the playoffs for a wing player who's mostly scoring on jumpers, contested ones at that. Kawhi Leonard, when healthy, is right in the conversation for best player in the world. In the world. So to have 11 players ahead of him is very questionable. It's just the lack of comfort in his health and his availability going into the season is the only reason why I'd say that he was ranked there, because he's better than James Harden. I honestly would take Kawhi Leonard with one leg over the James Harden I saw last season, seriously. And that may sound harsh, but I also am not big on players that don't move without the ball, if you've noticed, and you're going to continue to notice as the season progresses. Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, they're not Steph Curry off the ball or even Luke Kennard per se. Although actually Paul George, you can put him in very similar actions to Luke Kennard, and he comes off screens and curls, and he's really good at that off the ball. But Kawhi Leonard and Paul George are much better off the ball than guys like Dame and James Harden, especially James Harden, who, as I don't want to be too harsh, but as far as my 18 years watching basketball, and also I watch basketball from other eras as well, I'm big into that. James Harden, as far as stars and superstars go, is as stagnant off the ball as I've ever seen. And Paul George and Kawhi are not that. They give you more versatility to your offense, not always having the ball in their hands. And that's one thing I like about them that I haven't even mentioned. Even though Kawhi can have tunnel vision at times and get a little carried away, he doesn't pound the ball too much. Paul George, after 2020 and 2019, hasn't pounded the ball too much. They make quicker decisions, and they're able, especially Kawhi, to get a bucket in 0 dribbles or 1 or 2 dribbles. And that wastes a lot less movement, wastes a lot less energy, and is harder to guard, and it makes it more easy for your teammates. They don't want to just see you standing around and dribbling all the time. That's not fun for anyone at any level. So Kawhi Leonard being not top 10 is interesting, which means that ESPN believes that the Clippers don't have a top 10 player in the league going into the season, yet a lot of people think that the Clippers are going to win the championship. So how does that work? The Clippers have a team. The Clippers are going to win the championship without a top 10 player? How many titles have been won in the history of the NBA without a guy, even one guy, that's in the conversation for top 10 in the league? You can point to maybe the '04 Pistons are the team that comes to mind, but they had 5 all-star caliber players in their starting lineup. 5. We really only have 2 all-star caliber players. I think Norman Powell is great, but he's not an all-star caliber player. The one guy, though, that's a wild card is John Wall. But does this even mean anything? These rankings, does it mean anything? How accurate is it even? And does it even matter? I'm going to be concluding with my thoughts on that. All right, to close out. So the ESPN is saying the Clippers don't have a top 10 player. I very much disagree, because the only way the Clippers are going to win a championship is if Kawhi Leonard plays like a top 5 player, not even a top 10, a top 5 player. And you can make an argument that the Clippers have 2 top 10 players, because when Paul George plays at his best, he is right on that level with Jason Tatum, Jimmy Butler. I mean, people have argued Jimmy Butler and Paul George, strong arguments, heavy arguments for 2 years now. Jason Tatum is starting to be in this discussion as well. Paul George is as good as those guys to me when he's at his best, like we saw in the 2021 playoffs. But because sometimes he can have injury problems, sometimes he can be in his own head. That's a huge thing with Paul George. People tend to rank him a little bit lower sometimes than a guy like Jimmy Butler, who's very stone cold mentally and as a leader, even though skill-wise offensively and the eye test and the bag, as they say, the isolation package, Paul George is far ahead of Jimmy Butler. Paul George, when it comes to isolation package, is one of the smoothest in the league. His handle, one thing you really need to notice, guys, when you watch Paul George, or next time you watch him, pay attention to this. How low he gets on his dribble. And it's always better to be low on your dribble, low center of gravity, harder to steal. But for a guy that size to get so low is extremely impressive and rare. He is just, and I encourage you, if you're not even a Los Angeles resident, go watch Paul George play live, because he sticks out even more in person. His size is just unbelievable, and he looks so smooth. I got to watch Paul George in an open run live one of these days. I mean, the guy is just, he looks like a demigod sometimes. So I think the Clippers absolutely have 2 top 10 caliber players, but there's no way the Clippers can win a championship without Kawhi Leonard playing at the level that we've seen in the past. And that is a top 5 player consensus, no argument. So it's an interesting take from ESPN. It honestly helps the agenda if you want to get silly. The Clippers don't have any top 10 players, and they're still going to be favored to win the championship by many. But at the end of the day, these rankings don't mean a thing. It's a bunch of media members, no different than me, with their opinions and biases, making a list. They don't release the criteria. So it's just a talking point for people like myself to react to. At the end of the day, that's all it is. It's just to create engagement, stir up a conversation. We will see in the regular season and playoffs who answers these questions. Kawhi Leonard will show these people and the doubters and remind everybody who he is again, because people have seemed to forget. Too much time has passed now where people think that Kawhi Leonard, they act like he hasn't played in 5 years. It's been 1 year. And hopefully the surgeries, which is a huge thing in When we talk about the way the game has changed, the surgeries have gone so much better. You got guys like coming back from major injuries, and they don't even look that different. I mean, take Kevin Durant, for example, an Achilles tear in his early 30s, and he came back basically just as good. So I hope for Kawhi Leonard, there may be some questions. How good is his defense going to look? How well can he still move laterally? He was having trouble at times getting by guys when he's, in 2021. Is it going to be even harder for him to get by guys? Is he going to have to rely on even more tough mid-ranges and pull-ups, even though that's his game? We're just going to have to wait and see. But at the end of the day, these lists mean nothing. They don't really mean anything. ESPN has also made themselves look really silly the last couple years with the way they cover the game, the stories they put out. When I was younger, they used to be a respectable basketball network, and now they're just a narrative-pushing, drama-spewing load of trash, in my opinion, to put it harshly. And to put it accurately, that's how I feel. But it's okay, because we like it as Clipper fans when the expectations are lower. And that's the funniest part. The expectations are not going to be lower. They're going to be just as high, even though Kawhi Leonard and Paul George are apparently not top 10 players in the NBA. So we're just going to have to see how it goes. And by the way, I also want to say Robert Sarver, I talked about it previously, is stepping down and selling the Mercury and the Suns. So congratulations to Suns fans. I've been through this before. We've been through this before as Clipper fans. It's really good when you get that scummy owner out of the organization. And now to new beginnings, new ownership. Everything starts from the top. It'll be fun to see who goes and who Sarver sells to. By the way, his apology was also ridiculous. He didn't actually fully apologize and take accountability for his action. He was basically saying, I can't recover from cancel culture. So good riddance. We need less people like that in the league. And thankfully, the Clippers have the exact opposite of that. And he's on my shirt if you're watching the YouTube version of this podcast, which you should. You've got to subscribe to the YouTube channel. It's the fastest way to grow the channel, and we are trying to get to 1,000 subscribers. Get this. The Clippers and the Spurs are the only Locked On channels, NBA channels, with less than 1,000 subscribers. So the whole narrative of the Clippers have no fans, you're making it look good if you haven't subscribed. Let's get this thing to 1,000. And let me know in the comments, in the pinned comment. Do the Clippers have a top 10 player in the league? The resounding answer is going to be yes. But let me know, do the Clippers have a top 10 player in the league? Is ESPN tripping? Is it fair because Kawhi Leonard hasn't played in a year? Or are they out of their minds? Again, this season, over and over again, we come to the same point. It's really all about how healthy number 2 is. It really is. When he's going to be healthy, I cannot wait to hear the news that Kawhi Leonard is going to play in a game of some sort, whether it's the first preseason game against Maccabi Tel Aviv. I doubt he's going to be ready for that, but I have no evidence on that. Remember when Charles Mockler was on the podcast, he said that the Clippers when they post pictures of a player, it usually means that they're not hurt or out like that. If they're constantly posting Kawhi. That picture of him was trending recently about his thigh looking huge or his thighs looking huge and just running on the court. So they've been posting a lot of Kawhi smiling. Why would they do that if he's not close to being ready or ready? I'm not sure. But as always, make sure if you want to follow me, you can find me at DimeDropperPod on Twitter and Instagram. And of course, subscribe to my YouTube channel. I am a huge LA sports fan. Just posted a vlog of me working at my third Rams game of the season. So check that out. And of course, all season long, guys, Clipper vlogs. Whenever I go to a game, I post it. I have vlogs from every single 2021 playoff game. So if you want to relive our playoff run, no better way to do so than checking out my YouTube channel and going through those videos and seeing what this atmosphere was like on each night in the Staples Center. And of course, going post-game directly after Clipper games and Laker games as well during the season. And of course, Locked On Clippers, 5 days a week. You got to make sure to subscribe, follow us, write a review, and leave one on Apple Podcasts as well. I'm your host, Darian Vaziri. Thank you so much for joining us. And you already know, go Clippers.